discrimination showed its ugly face at one of the most prestigious hotels in the country. A powerful black CEO experienced the sting of prejudice firsthand, but what happened next would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Smith strode into the gleaming lobby of Manhattan's Grandview Imperial Hotel, his confident steps echoing across the marble floor. His choice of attire, simple jeans and a black t-shirt, stood in stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses that populated the space. The casual clothing wasn't a mistake. As CEO of Smith Hospitality Group, he had deliberately dressed down for this unannounced visit. Scornful glances followed him as he moved through the lobby. A woman in diamonds whispered behind her hand to her companion. A silver-haired executive adjusted his posture to create more distance. The message was clear. He didn't belong. Behind the ornate reception desk, Mary Johnson straightened her impeccably pressed blazer. The hotel manager had spent 15 years cultivating the Grandview Imperial's exclusive atmosphere, and she prided herself on identifying those who threatened it. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed the approaching figure: dark skin, casual clothes, confident demeanor. 3 strikes in her carefully maintained world of privilege. "Thomas," she murmured to the concierge beside her, "watch this." Her lips curled into a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. This would be a teaching moment for her staff. John maintained his steady pace, observing everything. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast a golden glow across the space, illuminating the subtle hostility directed his way. He noted how the wealthy patrons, predominantly white, shifted in their seats to watch what was about to unfold. Their expressions betrayed a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction, as if witnessing a system working exactly as designed. Mary stepped from behind the counter, blocking his path with practiced authority. Her voice rang out deliberately louder than necessary, ensuring an audience for what came next. "Excuse me, sir," she announced, each syllable sharp and clear. "This is a private establishment." The lobby fell into a hushed silence. A couple at the bar paused mid-conversation. The pianist in the corner hesitated for just a moment before continuing his melody. John's expression remained unchanged, his calm confidence unwavering in the face of her thinly veiled contempt. He'd encountered this scenario countless times before, the assumption that his appearance determined his worth. The hotel manager's icy stare held no power over him, though she clearly expected it would. Around them, guests shifted in their seats for a better view of the confrontation. Some wore expressions of smug approval, others simply watched with detached amusement, all of them unaware that they were witnessing the opening moments of something that would soon shake the foundations of an entire industry. "Good evening. I have a reservation under Smith Hospitality Group," John replied with unwavering composure, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the opulent lobby. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast dramatic shadows across his face as he maintained eye contact with Mary Johnson. The hotel manager's perfectly manicured fingernails hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she withdrew her hand entirely. She hadn't even bothered to check the system. A thin smile spread across her lips as she glanced toward the far corner of the lobby. "I'm afraid I don't see any such reservation," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "And regardless, we have certain standards at the Grandview Imperial." Several wealthy patrons looked up from their conversations, cocktails paused midway to lips, eyes narrowing with interest at the unfolding drama. A couple in designer evening wear exchanged knowing glances, clearly entertained by the spectacle. Mary raised her hand in a practiced gesture, summoning security with the confidence of someone who had performed this ritual many times before. "Perhaps you've confused us with another establishment," she added, her voice dripping with false politeness. Michael Brown and Robert Davis approached from opposite sides of the marble-floored lobby, their imposing figures drawing even more attention to the confrontation. Both men wore identical dark suits that strained slightly across their broad shoulders, their expressions professionally neutral despite the discomfort evident in their eyes. "Is there a problem, Miss Johnson?" Michael asked, positioning himself beside John while Robert flanked his other side. "This gentleman appears to be confused about his accommodations," Mary explained with theatrical patience. "Please escort him outside." Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. A woman in pearls leaned toward her companion, murmuring something behind her hand that made him chuckle. A businessman pretended to check his smartphone while watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. John remained perfectly still, dignity intact despite the intentional humiliation. He understood exactly what was happening. This was a performance, carefully orchestrated for maximum effect. The public rejection, the whispers, the stares, all designed to reinforce who belonged in these rarefied spaces and who did not. Mary's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she watched her security team close in on John. This was more than enforcement of hotel policy, it was theater for her wealthy audience. A reassurance that their exclusive sanctuary remained protected from outsiders. The cruel pageantry playing out exactly as she had intended, with every witness in the lobby becoming complicit in her discrimination. John Smith stood calmly in the center of the Grandview Imperial Hotel's opulent lobby, acutely aware of the tension his presence created. His dark skin and casual attire, a simple black t-shirt paired with designer jeans, shared a stark contrast against the sea of tailored suits and evening gowns surrounding him. Though his clothing was high quality and tasteful, it deliberately lacked the ostentatious displays of wealth the hotel's typical clientele favored. Mary Johnson circled him like a predator, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. The hotel manager's posture was rigid with disdain. Her eyes narrowed as she performed for her audience of wealthy patrons. "We maintain certain standards here at the Grandview Imperial," she declared, her voice sharp as glass, each word precisely chosen to cut. "Our guests expect a particular atmosphere which we are obligated to preserve." The CEO remained composed, noting how Mary's gaze flicked toward a cluster of white, affluent guests who had paused their conversations to watch the confrontation unfold. She was playing to them, drawing energy from their approving nods and whispers behind manicured hands. "I understand standards," John replied evenly. "I also understand the law regarding public accommodations." A flicker of annoyance crossed Mary's face at his composed response. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even anger, emotions she could use to further justify her actions. Instead, his dignity remained intact, threatening her narrative. John reached for his smartphone, navigating to his email with practiced efficiency. "I have a confirmed reservation," he explained, turning the screen toward her. "Under Smith Hospitality Group." Mary barely glanced at the device, her lips curling into a dismissive sneer. "Anyone can fake digital confirmations these days," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We've had issues with certain individuals attempting to gain improper access to our facilities." The implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Several guests nodded in understanding, while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. "I assure you this is legitimate," John insisted, his voice calm despite the public humiliation being orchestrated. Mary's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she raised her hand, signaling to security stationed near the entrance. "I'm afraid I must insist you leave the premises immediately." The manager's performance had achieved its desired effect, establishing her as the protector of exclusivity, the guardian of privilege. What she couldn't see was the quiet calculation behind John's eyes as he assessed every aspect of the interaction, mentally noting each staff member's reaction, each guest's complicity, each moment of discriminatory behavior. As security approached, John lowered his phone, his expression unreadable. The chess pieces were in motion, though only he knew the true state of the board. Michael Brown and Robert Davis approached John Smith from opposite sides, their imposing figures casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. The security guards wore identical dark suits with earpieces, their presence designed to intimidate. Michael, the taller of the two, positioned himself slightly ahead, clearly designated as the spokesperson. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Michael said, his deep voice firm but with a subtle hesitation. A flicker of guilt crossed his eyes as they briefly met John's. The security guard knew something wasn't right about this situation, but orders were orders, especially when they came from Mary Johnson. John maintained his composure, shoulders squared and head held high. Not a trace of anger or indignation crossed his face, only calm dignity as he nodded once. "I understand," he replied quietly. "No need to make this more uncomfortable than it already is." Robert shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the manager who stood watching with arms crossed and satisfaction etched across her features. The younger guard had been at the hotel for only 6 months, but even he recognized the wrongness of the situation. Still, his job depended on following protocol. "This way, please," Robert gestured toward the revolving doors at the entrance. The lobby had fallen into a hushed silence, with guests pretending not to stare while absorbing every detail of the unfolding scene. A couple in evening wear whispered behind manicured hands. An elderly gentleman with a diamond-tipped cane nodded approvingly at Mary. A young woman in designer clothing actually smirked as she sipped her champagne. John walked between the guards with measured steps, neither rushing nor resisting. His casual attire, the simple black t-shirt and well-worn jeans, stood in stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him, yet he carried himself with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere he chose to be. As they reached the entrance, Michael leaned slightly closer. "For what it's worth, I'm just doing my job," he murmured, almost apologetically. John's eyes met his briefly. "We all have choices about how we do our jobs," he replied, voice low but clear. The revolving door whispered as it turned, delivering John to the cool evening air outside the Grandview Imperial. Behind him, the lobby gradually returned to its normal buzz, guests exchanging satisfied glances and nods. They believed they had witnessed justice, the preservation of their exclusive sanctuary from an unwelcome intruder. None of them, not even the security guards returning to their posts, could have imagined what would unfold in the next 20 minutes. Outside on the busy Manhattan sidewalk, John Smith's composure remained unshaken despite the humiliation he had just endured. The evening air carried the sounds of traffic and pedestrians, but he stood perfectly still, his dignity intact. He pulled out his smartphone and dialed his assistant with practiced calm. "Jennifer Williams speaking," came the crisp professional voice. "Execute the acquisition announcement," John said quietly, his tone betraying none of the emotion he felt. "Full staff meeting in 20 minutes. Termination paperwork for management. Effective tonight." Jennifer's efficient reply confirmed the plan was already in motion. "Everything's prepared, sir. The press release goes live in 3 minutes. Legal has the termination documents ready. The board members have been notified." "Thank you, Jennifer," he replied, ending the call. John gazed up at the gleaming facade of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, its ornate entrance now representing something very different than it had moments ago. The journey from struggling entrepreneur to head of a $3 billion hospitality empire had taught him patience. Each insult, each door closed in his face over the years, had only strengthened his resolve to change the industry from within. His phone buzzed with incoming messages. The news was spreading faster than anticipated. Boardrooms across the city exploded with the announcement Smith Hospitality Group had just acquired the entire Metropolitan Hotel Holdings chain, including the Grandview Imperial. The acquisition had been kept secret for months, with only the highest executives aware of the impending change in ownership. John watched as several guests exited the hotel, their phones lighting up with notifications. A business executive in an expensive suit glanced at his device, then looked up at John with sudden recognition and shock. The man hurriedly retreated back inside, undoubtedly to spread the word. Within minutes, financial alerts were pinging across Wall Street. Smith Hospitality Group's stock jumped 3 points in after-hours trading. Competitors scrambled to understand the implications. Industry insiders who had dismissed John years earlier were now frantically calling their contacts for information. He straightened his black t-shirt and checked his watch. 15 minutes until the staff meeting that would change everything. John had no desire for revenge, but accountability was non-negotiable. The systemic issues represented by Mary Johnson's behavior required decisive action. As he waited, John reflected on the real purpose behind tonight's events. This wasn't just about one hotel or one manager. It was about transforming an entire industry that had tolerated discrimination for far too long. Mary Johnson basked in the aftermath of the confrontation, her posture relaxed yet regal as she accepted congratulations from the hotel's wealthy patrons. A silver-haired gentleman in a tailored suit raised his martini glass in silent approval, while a woman draped in diamonds touched Mary's arm appreciatively. "We come here precisely because you maintain standards," the woman whispered, her voice carrying just enough for others to hear. "Some people simply don't understand what exclusive means." Mary nodded graciously. "The Grandview Imperial has a reputation to uphold, Mrs. Harrington. I'm simply doing my job." Meanwhile, assistant manager David Miller stood behind the reception desk, his stomach knotting with unease. The confrontation had seemed off somehow. The man had been too composed, too confident. David's fingers flew across the keyboard as he checked the reservation system, his breath catching when he found it, a confirmed booking under Smith Hospitality Group, with an additional note that made his blood run cold. CEO assessment visit priority service required. "Oh my God," David muttered, his ties suddenly feeling too tight. He glanced across the marble lobby, where Mary continued holding court, oblivious to the disaster unfolding. Should he tell her? Would it make any difference now? The young manager's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and quickly searched John Smith, CEO. The results confirmed his worst fears. Dozens of articles about the self-made billionaire who had transformed the hospitality industry with his emphasis on dignity and inclusion. David's gaze darted nervously around the opulent space. A businessman near the bar was staring intently at his phone, then whispered something to his companion. A young couple by the fountain suddenly looked up from their devices with wide eyes. Throughout the lobby, phones began to chime with news alerts, and the atmosphere shifted perceptibly as guests started murmuring to one another. "Did you see this? Smith Hospitality just acquired Metropolitan. Isn't that our parent company?" Mary remained dubious, still soaking in adulation from her admirers. David watched her with growing horror, knowing her career, perhaps all their careers, hung in the balance. The manager's face, so triumphant moments ago, would soon crumble when she learned the truth. He debated warning her but hesitated. She had ignored his attempt to verify the reservation earlier. Would she listen now, or would she shoot the messenger? David's heart pounded against his ribs as he watched the news ripple through the lobby like an invisible wave, phones lighting up one after another. The reckoning was coming, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. John Smith leaned against the sleek black vehicle parked across from the Grandview Imperial, the cool evening air a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. His mind drifted back to his earliest days in hospitality, sleeping on a friend's couch while drafting business plans, facing rejection after rejection from investors who couldn't see past his appearance to recognize his vision. Now, 15 years later, he stood as the head of a $3 billion empire that spanned 4 continents. Each acquisition, each renovation, each new property had been guided by a singular philosophy: create spaces where everyone felt valued. The CEO smiled faintly, remembering the skeptics who claimed his inclusive approach would alienate wealthy clientele. Instead, it had become his competitive advantage. His smartphone vibrated in his palm. Jennifer Williams' name flashed on the screen, and he answered immediately. "It's happening exactly as we anticipated," his assistant reported, her voice crisp and efficient. "The acquisition announcement just hit the major networks. CNBC is running it as breaking news, and the Times already has it on their website." John nodded, watching a group of well-dressed patrons exit the hotel, completely unaware of the seismic shift occurring around them. And the market response? Stock prices jumped 12% in the first 5 minutes after the announcement. Jennifer replied, "Our investors are ecstatic. The Metropolitan chain's reputation has been slipping for years. People are calling this a masterstroke." Through the revolving doors, he could see staff members huddled near the reception desk, their faces tense as they checked their devices. Word was spreading. "The city's power players are already reaching out," his assistant continued. 3 hotel magnates have requested meetings tomorrow, and the mayor's office called to congratulate you personally." John straightened his posture, adjusting his simple black t-shirt. "And the staff audit complete. We have documentation of 17 discrimination complaints buried by management over the past 3 years, all settled with NDAs." The businessman's expression hardened. This wasn't just about one humiliating incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been deliberately concealed and enabled. "Perfect timing," he murmured, watching as confused expressions spread across the faces of guests in the lobby. Their phones were lighting up with notifications, and several were pointing in his direction, recognition dawning. "Are you ready to go back in?" Jennifer asked. John Smith took a deep breath, centering himself for what came next. "Absolutely. It's time for some accountability." Back inside the opulent lobby of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, Mary Johnson held court like a queen among her subjects. She gestured dramatically, recounting her version of events to an admiring circle of wealthy guests. "You should have seen his face when I called security," she laughed, basking in their approving nods. "Some people simply don't understand our standards." A silver-haired gentleman in a tailored suit raised his martini in salute. "That's why we come here, Mary. You protect the atmosphere we pay for." The manager beamed, completely unaware that her professional fate was being decided in real time across the city's boardrooms. Her performance continued, each embellishment more outrageous than the last, painting John Smith as an uncouth intruder rather than the dignified businessman he was. Meanwhile, at the reception desk, David Miller's hands trembled as he refreshed the news feed on his computer. The assistant manager's throat went dry when the headline appeared. "Breaking: Smith Hospitality Group acquires Metropolitan Hotel Holdings in surprise $3 billion deal." His eyes darted to the smaller text beneath. "All properties, including flagship Grandview Imperial, now under new ownership, effective immediately." "Oh my God," David whispered, his face draining of color. He glanced toward Mary, still entertaining her audience, completely oblivious to the seismic shift occurring beneath her feet. Across the lobby, phones began buzzing with notifications. A young venture capitalist glanced at his screen, then looked up sharply, scanning the room with new awareness. He nudged his companion and whispered something urgent. The news was spreading like wildfire. "Did you see this?" a woman in diamonds murmured to her husband, tilting her smartphone toward him. His eyes widened in recognition. The atmosphere in the marble-floored space transformed subtly but unmistakably. The earlier triumph of exclusivity gave way to confused murmurs and sideways glances. Guests who moments before had applauded Mary's actions now shifted uncomfortably, reassessing the situation with new information. David watched the ripple effect with mounting anxiety. He should warn her, he knew, but his feet remained frozen to the floor. The realization of what had just happened, who they had just humiliated, was too overwhelming. A distinguished older woman lowered her phone and stared directly at Mary with newfound disapproval. Others followed suit, the mood shifting from admiration to discomfort, then to something approaching horror, as understanding dawned. Mary, still riding high on her perceived victory, failed to notice the changing tide until the whispers grew too loud to ignore. She paused mid-sentence, finally sensing something amiss in the suddenly tense atmosphere of her beloved lobby. John Smith re-entered the gleaming lobby of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, his stride now carrying a different energy. The same jeans and black t-shirt that had earlier drawn scornful glances now seemed to radiate authority. This time, as he crossed the marble floor, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Eyes widened in recognition as several guests lowered their champagne flutes. A young tech entrepreneur in the corner, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, fumbled with his drink, spilling some of the amber liquid onto the polished floor. "That's John Smith," he whispered urgently to his companions, his voice carrying in the suddenly quiet space. "He owns the place." The whisper rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Phones emerged from pockets and purses as guests frantically searched business news sites, confirming what seemed impossible moments ago. The same wealthy clientele who had smirked at his ejection now straightened their postures, some even attempting subtle nods of acknowledgement. Mary Johnson stood frozen behind the reception desk, her earlier triumph evaporating as she watched the CEO approach. The manager's face, previously flushed with satisfaction, now drained of color. She gripped the edge of the marble counter, her knuckles turning white as the reality of her situation began to dawn. David Miller rushed to her side, his nervous energy palpable, as he showed her the screen of the reservation system. "I tried to tell you," the assistant manager stammered, his voice cracking. "He's the CEO. He owns everything." David's eyes darted between Mary and John, torn between professional loyalty and the undeniable mistake they had made. The lobby, with its crystal chandeliers and opulent furnishings, had transformed from a stage for Mary's power play into the setting for her downfall. Guests who had been complicit in their approval of the discrimination now averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their smartphones or the intricate patterns of the carpet. John approached the reception desk with measured step. Unlike Mary's earlier display of contempt, his expression remained calm and focused. The reversal of power was unmistakable. The man who had been escorted out by security was now returning as the ultimate authority. As he reached the desk, the silence in the lobby was electric. Even the ambient music seemed to have faded away, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Mary attempted to compose herself, straightening her uniform jacket with trembling hands, but the damage was done. The manager who had so eagerly enforced standards now faced the consequences of her actions as the true owner of the establishment stood before her. Mary's face drained of color as John approached the reception desk with measured steps. The marble floor seemed to amplify each footfall in the now hushed lobby. Guests who moments ago had been smirking at his expulsion now stared wide-eyed, recognition dawning on their faces. "I believe we were interrupted during introductions," John Smith said, his voice calm yet carrying throughout the space. He extended a sleek business card toward Mary Johnson, who took it with visibly trembling fingers. The embossed lettering caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. John Smith, CEO, Smith Hospitality Group. The crowd's silence was electric. Wealthy patrons who had been sipping champagne froze mid-gesture, watching the dramatic reversal unfold. A woman in pearls whispered to her companion, her voice carrying farther than intended in the silent room. Several guests discreetly checked their phones, confirming what was happening through breaking news alerts. Mary stared at the card, her complexion ashen. "This must be some mistake," she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. "No mistake," John replied, maintaining his dignified composure. He removed his smartphone from his pocket and dialed with deliberate movements. Placing the call on speaker, he held the device between them. Jennifer Williams' crisp, professional voice boomed through the lobby. "All preparations complete, sir. Legal has finalized the paperwork." "Thank you, Jennifer," he acknowledged. "Please inform Johnson of her current employment status." Without hesitation, his assistant delivered the verdict. "Mary Johnson, your employment is terminated immediately for cause. All management staff are to report for review within the hour. Security personnel will escort you to collect personal belongings only." Mary's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly removed from water. Around them, the wealthy clientele who had so eagerly participated in John's humiliation now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. David Miller appeared at the edge of the gathering, his expression a mixture of vindication and anxiety. The assistant manager clutched a tablet to his chest, documentation of his earlier attempt to verify John's reservation visible on the screen. Michael and Robert, the security guards who had escorted John out minutes earlier, now stood awkwardly near the entrance, uncertain whose orders to follow. "The Metropolitan Hotel Holdings chain, including this establishment, is now under new management," John announced to the room at large, his voice firm but not unkind. "And our first order of business is addressing the culture of discrimination that ends tonight." Mary finally found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "You can't do this." John's response was simple. "I already have." The security guards stood frozen in place, their imposing frames suddenly diminished by the revelation. Michael Brown and Robert Davis exchanged panicked glances across the marble floor, the gravity of their actions sinking in like lead weights. They had escorted the owner of their entire company out of his own building, following orders that now threatened their livelihood. Around them, the lobby buzzed with frantic whispers. Staff members who had witnessed the earlier confrontation now pressed against walls and doorways, faces pale with shock. A bellhop dropped his luggage cart, the soft thud punctuating the tense silence. David Miller approached John Smith with visible trepidation, his shoulders hunched and hands trembling. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled to maintain eye contact with the CEO. "Sir, I tried to tell her about your reservation," David managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw your name in the system with the executive note. I'm sorry I couldn't stop what happened." John turned his full attention to the assistant manager, studying the man's genuine distress. The lobby fell silent, everyone straining to hear the exchange that might determine their collective fate. "I appreciate that, David," John replied, his voice measured yet carrying throughout the space. "Doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." His gaze swept across the assembled staff, lingering briefly on Michael and Robert, who looked away in shame. A young desk clerk clutched her uniform lapel, tears welling in her eyes. "This moment isn't just about one incident," John continued. "It's about a culture that allowed it to happen. Some of you saw what was wrong and stayed silent. Others actively participated." Jennifer Williams stepped forward, tablet in hand, her professional demeanor unwavering as she surveyed the room. She stood slightly behind her boss, ready with whatever information he might need. "Each of you will be evaluated individually," John explained. "Those who enabled discrimination will face consequences. Those who tried to prevent it will have opportunities to help rebuild." David straightened slightly, hope flickering across his features. "What happens now, sir?" "Now," John said, "we begin the hard work of transformation. Starting tonight, this hotel operates under new principles. Dignity for all guests, respect for all staff. No exceptions." The weight of his words settled over the lobby. For some, they carried the promise of redemption, for others the certainty of reckoning. The power dynamics that had defined the Grandview Imperial had shifted irrevocably in 20 short minutes, leaving everyone to navigate a new reality, where actions, not appearances, determined one's worth. Mary Johnson's face contorted with panic as the reality of her situation crashed down around her. The same lobby where she'd wielded power moments ago now felt like a courtroom, with every guest and staff member bearing witness to her downfall. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice cracking with desperation. "I was following protocol. We have standards to maintain." Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the reception desk for support. "The hotel has procedures for dealing with people who don't fit our clientele profile." John Smith stood perfectly still, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mary's unraveling composure. The lobby had fallen completely silent, the crystal chandeliers casting dramatic shadows across the marble floor as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. "Protocol?" John repeated, his voice measured yet powerful enough to carry throughout the space. "Is that what you call discrimination at Metropolitan Holdings? A protocol?" Several wealthy guests who had earlier nodded approvingly at Mary's actions now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with both the manager and the CEO. Michael and Robert, the security guards, stared at the floor, their earlier confidence evaporated. "Tonight," John continued, "everyone in this room witnessed what happens when power is abused." His words echoed in the marble hall, seeming to bounce off every surface. "You didn't check my reservation because you made assumptions based on my appearance. That's not protocol, that's prejudice." Mary attempted to interject, but John raised his hand slightly, silencing her with the quiet authority that had built a $3 billion hospitality empire. "In the 20 minutes I spent outside, I received 17 messages from former employees and guests who experienced similar treatment under your management." He gestured toward David Miller, who stood nervously to the side. "Your assistant tried to warn you. He checked the system. He knew who I was." David nodded slightly, relief washing over his features as John acknowledged his attempt to intervene. "Protocol exists to ensure fairness, not to justify exclusion," John said, addressing not just Mary but everyone present. "The hospitality industry should welcome all guests with dignity, regardless of appearance or background." A young black couple who had been watching from near the bar exchanged meaningful glances. The woman discreetly wiped a tear from her eye. "Effective immediately," John announced, "Grandview Imperial will undergo a complete cultural transformation. Those unwilling to participate in that change can follow Ms. Johnson to the exit." Mary's protests died on her lips as she realized no one, not the wealthy guests who had cheered her on, not the staff who had followed her lead, was coming to her defense. In 20 short minutes, the power dynamic she had cultivated for years had been completely reversed. Jennifer Williams' voice echoed through the lobby speaker with clinical precision. "We've uncovered 17 separate discrimination complaints against this establishment over the past 3 years. All were systematically buried by previous management." She paused, letting the information sink in. Settlement payouts totaling $1.2 million were distributed with non-disclosure agreements to silence victims. Effective immediately, Smith Hospitality Group is waiving all NDAs related to discrimination cases. John Smith stood tall, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. "Everyone deserves to be heard," he said, addressing the now silent crowd. The wealthy guests who had minutes ago smirked at John's humiliation now shifted uncomfortably in their designer clothes. A woman in pearls stared at her champagne flute, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The tech entrepreneur who had recognized John earlier whispered urgently to his companion, both looking mortified. Mary Johnson's face contorted with panic. "Those complaints were handled according to corporate policy," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Burying evidence isn't policy, it's complicity," John replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "And everyone in this room needs to understand what that means." On cue, Jennifer sent documentation to the large display screen behind the reception desk. Case after case appeared. A black family denied a reservation despite availability. A Hispanic couple charged double the standard rate. Staff members of color relegated to back-of-house positions regardless of qualifications. David Miller stood frozen, his eyes darting between the screen and his former boss. The assistant manager had suspected some of this, but never the scale. "I didn't know," he whispered, though nobody was listening. The security guards, Michael and Robert, exchanged glances of growing unease. They had been the physical enforcers of Mary's discriminatory policies, and now that reality was sinking in. "Starting tomorrow," John announced, "every employee will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. Those willing to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to change will have a place here. Those who cannot," he let the implication hang in the air. A staff member in the back began to cry softly. Others looked at their shoes, the ceiling, anywhere but at the damning evidence displayed for all to see. The guests who had witnessed John's ejection now faced their own reckoning. Their silent approval had made them accomplices. An older gentleman in an expensive suit stood up. "I should have said something," he admitted, his voice cracking with shame. John nodded acknowledgement. "It's never too late to choose a different path." The lobby of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, once a monument to exclusivity, had transformed into a courtroom of conscience, where everyone, staff, management, and guests alike, now stood accused of building a culture where discrimination had flourished in plain sight. Mary Johnson's desperation morphed into unbridled rage, her composed facade crumbling completely. "This is entrapment," she shrieked, her voice echoing across the marble lobby. "You set me up deliberately." Her finger jabbed accusingly at John Smith, trembling with fury. The formerly confident manager now looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting wildly around the room seeking allies among the guests who had cheered her on just minutes before. John remained unflappable. "No one set you up, Ms. Johnson. You made choices, the same choices you've apparently been making for years." Jennifer Williams stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We have 17 documented discrimination complaints that were buried by previous management," she announced, her professional tone cutting through the tension. "Settlement documents totaling over $2 million, all with non-disclosure agreements to silence victims." Mary's protests died in her throat as several guests raised their smartphones, revealing they had captured the entire confrontation on video. A young couple who had been seated near the reception desk approached John, offering their footage. "We recorded everything," the woman said quietly. "The way she spoke to you wasn't right." Outside, news vans were already pulling up to the Grandview Imperial Hotel. Word had spread rapidly through social media channels, and reporters sensed a major story breaking. They streamed through the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones extended toward the center of the lobby where John now stood. "Mr. Smith, is it true you purchased this hotel chain just to expose discriminatory practices?" called out a reporter from the doorway. The CEO adjusted his simple black t-shirt, the very garment that had triggered Mary's prejudice, and addressed the growing crowd with measured confidence. "The acquisition was always planned," he explained, "but tonight revealed exactly why change is needed. Transparency is the only way to rebuild trust." Security guards Michael and Robert hovered uncertainly at the edges of the scene, their earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort. David Miller approached them, speaking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed and participated in. "We have documentation of every incident," John continued as cameras recorded his every word. "And starting tomorrow, Smith Hospitality Group will waive all non-disclosure agreements so victims can speak freely about their experiences." Mary's face contorted with rage and fear. "You can't do this. My reputation." "Your reputation," John interrupted calmly, is exactly what you earned through your actions. Nothing more, nothing less. The lobby had transformed from a scene of humiliation to one of reckoning. Reporters scribbled notes furiously while hotel staff watched in stunned silence, many realizing they stood at a crossroads in their own careers. The wealthy guests who had smirked at John's ejection now averted their eyes, suddenly finding great interest in their expensive shoes or the ceiling's ornate moldings. This isn't just about one hotel, John told the assembled media. It's about changing an industry that has tolerated discrimination for far too long. The lobby of the Grandview Imperial Hotel had transformed into an impromptu media center. Camera crews from 3 major networks positioned their equipment near the grand staircase, while journalists huddled in corners, frantically typing notes on their devices. The crystal chandeliers that had earlier cast their golden light on scenes of discrimination now illuminated a moment of reckoning. Staff members formed a line near the reception desk, their faces displaying a range of emotion. Some hotel employees stepped forward eagerly, relief evident in their postures as they finally had permission to speak their truths. Others hung back, eyes downcast, aware that their silent complicity would now face public scrutiny. I tried to speak up once, admitted a young bellhop, his voice trembling. Mary told me I'd be fired if I ever questioned how guests were treated again. A housekeeper nodded vigorously. We all saw it happen repeatedly, but we needed our job. John Smith moved through the space with quiet authority, occasionally stopping to speak with staff members, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the room. Jennifer Williams efficiently coordinated the journalist requests, ensuring everyone would be heard in an orderly fashion. From the entrance appeared Marcus and Tiana Johnson, the young black couple who had been seated in the corner earlier that evening. They approached John hesitantly. We've stayed at Metropolitan Properties before, Marcus explained, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Each time we faced subtle questions about our reservation, requests for additional ID, or staff following us through common areas. Tiana nodded. We documented everything. When we complained to management, Mary Johnson personally told us we were imagining things and suggested we might be more comfortable at a different establishment. Several staff members lowered their eyes in recognition of the familiar pattern. David Miller stepped forward, visibly distressed. I witnessed it all, the assistant manager admitted, and I didn't do enough to stop it. John placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. Your experiences matter, he said firmly, making eye contact with both Marcus and Tiana. Tonight, the world is listening. This isn't just about one hotel or one manager. It's about changing an entire industry. The couple handed over their documented evidence to Jennifer, who added it to the growing file of testimonials. Outside, more guests arrived, not for accommodations, but to share similar stories of discrimination they had experienced at the property. As cameras captured the scene, the hotel's transformation had already begun, from a bastion of exclusivity to ground zero for a long-overdue conversation about dignity and hospitality. Mary Johnson was escorted through the gleaming lobby of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, her designer heels clicking against marble floors that had until 20 minutes ago been her domain. The same security guards who had removed John Smith at her command now flanked her sides, their faces stoic but their discomfort evident. Michael Brown kept his gaze forward, avoiding eye contact with the woman who had been his boss just moments before. The poetic justice wasn't lost on anyone watching. Please collect your personal items and vacate the premises immediately, Robert Davis instructed, his voice professional but tinged with newfound respect for proper protocol rather than prejudice. The wealthy guests who had earlier nodded in approval at Mary's discrimination now averted their eyes or stared openly in shock. Some even recorded the scene on their smartphones, the modern-day equivalent of public stock. Her face, once flushed with self-righteous authority, now burned with humiliation as she clutched her designer handbag to her chest like armor. This isn't over, she hissed, but her threat evaporated in the vastness of the lobby, absorbed by the crystal chandeliers that now seemed to mock her fall from grace. As the former manager disappeared through the revolving doors, a collective exhale rippled through the staff. Years of enforced complicity in a discriminatory system had ended in a single evening. The weight of unspoken rules about which guests were desirable and which were to be scrutinized lifted visibly from their shoulders. David Miller watched Mary's departure with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The assistant manager had tried to intervene, had seen the reservation details that confirmed John's legitimacy, but his warning had come too late. Now, gathering his courage, he approached the CEO, who stood calmly at the center of the transformed power dynamic. "Sir," David began, his voice steadier than he expected, "I speak for many of us when I say—" He glanced around at the staff, who had gathered in small clusters, their faces reflecting his own uncertainty. "We want to do better. How do we change?" The question hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. In it was acknowledgement of past failures, but also the seed of something new. Hope flickered in David's eyes as he awaited John Smith's response, aware that his career and the culture of an entire establishment hinged on what came next. John studied the younger man's face, measuring the sincerity behind the word. Around them, the hotel lobby had become a stage where a new story was being written in real time, one about accountability, transformation, and the possibility of redemption. Accountability is the first step. Training is the second. "Are you ready?" John replied, his voice carrying a weight that made David Miller straighten his posture. The assistant manager nodded eagerly, relief washing over his face as he realized he was being offered redemption rather than termination. John Smith gathered the remaining staff in the opulent lobby, now transformed into an impromptu meeting space. The crystal chandeliers that had earlier illuminated Mary's discrimination now cast light on a path forward. "What happened tonight wasn't just about one person's actions," the CEO explained. "It's about a culture that allowed those actions to flourish." Jennifer Williams circulated among the employees, distributing tablets containing the first draft of a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy. Her efficiency was matched only by her determination as she answered questions from nervous staff members. "Starting tomorrow, every employee will undergo mandatory sensitivity training," John announced. "Those who embrace change will find opportunities to grow with us. Those who resist—" He let the implication hang in the air, his calm demeanor more powerful than any threat. Michael and Robert, the security guards who had escorted John out earlier, stood at the back of the group, their imposing frames now diminished by shame. The taller of the two raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, we were just following orders. Will we lose our jobs too?" John studied them thoughtfully. Following orders doesn't absolve responsibility, but acknowledging mistakes does create possibility. Your actions tomorrow matter more than your actions today. Across Manhattan, the news spread like wildfire. In boardrooms of competing luxury hotels, emergency meetings were called as executives frantically reviewed their own policies. The Metropolitan Hotel Holdings acquisition had already been major business news. Now it was becoming a watershed moment for the entire industry. David approached John after the meeting, determination replacing his earlier nervousness. "I want to help lead this change," he said. "I should have done more before." John nodded. "Sometimes transformation requires a catalyst. Today that was us." He gazed around the lobby, where wealthy guests were now watching with newfound respect rather than contempt. "Tomorrow it will be every hotel that wants to survive in the new landscape." Outside, a small crowd of journalists had gathered, sensing a story bigger than a simple corporate takeover. Jennifer fielded their questions with practiced precision, making it clear that Smith Hospitality Group was redefining luxury as inclusive excellence rather than exclusive privilege. As midnight approached, John stood at the entrance where he'd been humiliated hours earlier. The hotel still gleamed with marble and gold, but something fundamental had shifted. "This is just the beginning," he murmured to himself, watching as the news vans multiplied. Months later, Mary Johnson found herself in a sterile conference room, facing a panel of 5 industry veterans at the employment tribunal. Her once impeccable suit now seemed to hang loosely on her frame, her confident replaced by a hollow stare. The room buzzed with tension as attorneys arranged stacks of evidence folders on the polished table. "We have 17 documented complaints spanning 8 years, announced the lead arbitrator, a silver-haired woman who had once been Mary's mentor. "Each shows a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward guests who didn't fit your establishment's preferred image." Mary's attorney attempted to paint the incidents as isolated misunderstandings, but the evidence told a different story. Settlement documents revealed how Metropolitan Hotel Holdings had systematically buried complaints, paying victims for their silence while Mary continued her practices unchecked. Most damning was the smartphone footage from that fateful night. now viewed over 12 million times online, showing her orchestrating John Smith's humiliation with calculated precision. "The complainant was deliberately targeting me," Mary insisted, her voice brittle. "He set me up to fail." The tribunal exchanged knowing glances. They'd heard this defense before. On the large monitor mounted to the wall, John appeared via video conference from his office in Chicago, where he was overseeing another hotel transformation. Despite the digital medium, his presence commanded the room's attention. "Miss Johnson wasn't selected for termination," he explained calmly. "Her actions that night merely confirmed what our due diligence had already uncovered, a culture of exclusion that began at management level." When questioned about his methods, John leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about one person," he stated firmly. "It's about changing an entire industry. For decades, luxury hospitality has operated on coded language and subtle barriers. My company is committed to dismantling those barriers." The tribunal nodded, understanding the larger implications. This case had already sent shockwaves through hospitality circles nationwide, with major chains scrambling to audit their practices and implement new training protocols. As the hearing concluded, Mary stared at John's image on the screen. The man she dismissed so easily had systematically dismantled her career, yet his expression held no malice, only determination. "The tribunal will deliver its verdict tomorrow," announced the chairperson, gathering her papers. Outside, reporters waited, cameras ready. Mary slipped out a side entrance, but there was no escaping the judgment that followed her. Her 23-year career in hospitality had been reduced to a cautionary tale, her name now synonymous with the very discrimination she had so carefully disguised as maintaining standard. The employment tribunal convened in downtown Manhattan, with Mary Johnson seated alone at the defendant's table. Her once impeccable appearance had deteriorated. Dark circles shadowed her eyes as she faced the 5-member panel. The evidence against the former hotel manager mounted with each passing hour: 17 documented discrimination complaints, settlement papers with non-disclosure agreements, and witness testimonies from both guests and former staff members. The pattern of behavior demonstrated by Johnson shows a calculated effort to discriminate based on appearance and perceived social status, stated the tribunal chairperson, her voice echoing through the hushed chamber. "This tribunal finds the termination not only justified but necessary." Mary stared blankly ahead as the verdict was delivered. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her documents, the realization sinking in that her 20-year career in luxury hospitality had ended in disgrace. The panel's decision went further, recommending a 5-year industry blacklisting, an unprecedented move that sent ripples through hospitality circles nationwide. John Smith provided his testimony via video conference, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mary's visible distress. "This case represents more than one individual's actions," he explained to the attentive panel. "It exemplifies the systemic issues plaguing our industry. The outcome today must serve as a watershed moment for change." Within weeks, Mary's case became required reading in hospitality management programs across the country. Harvard Business School developed a case study titled "The Imperial Incident: Ethics and Inclusion in Modern Hospitality." Human resources departments in luxury chains nationwide revised their training protocols, incorporating footage from that fateful evening as a powerful teaching tool. Meanwhile, Smith Hospitality Group's market value increased by 23% in the quarter following the incident. The company implemented a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program that quickly became the industry benchmark. Luxury travel publications praised the transformation at Grandview Imperial, where occupancy rates reached 97%, a record high for the property. Jennifer Williams, now promoted to Chief Operations Officer, oversaw the implementation of anonymous reporting systems across all Smith properties. "What happened at Grandview wasn't isolated," she told Hospitality Today magazine. "But our response created a template for accountability that's changing the entire sector." As Mary struggled to find employment outside the industry, her name became synonymous with discriminatory practices in professional circles. The tribunal's decision had accomplished exactly what John intended, sending a clear message that in modern hospitality, exclusivity would no longer serve as a cover for discrimination. 2 years later, John Smith stepped through the gleaming entrance of the Grandview Imperial Hotel, greeted by warm smiles from the diverse staff manning the reception desk. The transformation was evident everywhere he looked. Where once cold exclusivity had reigned, now genuine warmth and inclusivity flourished. David Miller, now the general manager, hurried across the marble floor to greet him. "Mr. Smith, welcome back. The quarterly diversity report is ready for your review." The nervousness that had once defined David had been replaced by confident professionalism. John nodded appreciatively. "I'm more interested in seeing the changes in action today, David. Walk with me." The lobby buzzed with energy. A tech entrepreneur in casual attire chatted animatedly with an elderly couple in formal wear. A black family checked in without receiving a single sideways glance. Staff members of various backgrounds moved through the space with purpose and pride. "Our occupancy rates are up 17%, David explained as they walked, "and employee retention has never been higher." John paused by the grand staircase where he had once been humiliated. "And the training program? Expanding to 3 more hotel chains next month," David replied. "We've had requests from hospitality groups across 4 continents. A young woman approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you personally. I was hired through your Second Chance Employment Initiative last year." John smiled, extending his hand. "What department?" "Management track, sir. I start supervisor training next week." As she walked away, John turned to David. "That's the real measure of success." They continued their tour, stopping occasionally to speak with staff members. The CEO noticed Jennifer Williams waiting near the restaurant entrance, tablet in hand. "The Smith Hospitality Group stock hit another record high this morning," she reported. "And the documentary about the transformation premieres at the film festival next month." John nodded, but his attention had shifted to a framed photograph on the wall. The original staff from 2 years ago standing alongside new hires from underrepresented communities. The image served as both memorial and promise. "One moment can trigger change," he said quietly, "but sustaining it takes commitment from everyone." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, John surveyed the hotel that had become the flagship for a new era in hospitality. What had begun with his public humiliation had evolved into an industry-wide revolution. The victory wasn't just about one hotel or one discriminatory manager. It was about proving that dignity, once recognized as universal, could transform not just a business, but the people within it.